Are you feeling weary because life keeps sweeping you away nonstop? Are you searching for something deeper, a true sense of peace, a path to live without running away from yourself? We often believe that happiness and transformation only come when the external world changes, when we get what we want, when circumstances are more favorable. But that is an illusion. Buddhism teaches us a powerful truth. The greatest transformation doesn't begin out there. It begins right here, within you. It often blossoms in solitude and stillness, when you dare to return, to face yourself, and to rebuild. This is the path back to your inner home, and it can begin immediately. Today, we will explore 12 principles, not just dry theory, but 12 practical keys to reshape your mind, renew your spirit, and liberate the person you truly are. We will journey through 3 main pillars of this transformation.
Pillar 1. Calming the outer and inner world, stopping resistance, and finding instant stillness. We begin with the first pillar, learning to soothe the pressures and noise from the external world and from within ourselves. That is how to find instant peace, by letting go and returning. The first key and the root of so much pressure is letting go of the illusion of control. Look, we try to control everything. We want others to act according to our will. We want work to go according to plan. We want the future to be certain. And when things don't go as we wish, we become anxious, angry, disappointed. It's like trying to force a river to flow backward. You only exhaust yourself. So what can you do right now? The next time you feel irritated by something not going your way, an unexpected situation, for example, stop. Take a deep breath. Recognize that you are trying to control something you cannot control. Then direct your energy towards what you can control, your reaction. Try this simple thing every morning. Before starting your day, tell yourself, today I will accept what happens and focus only on how I react. Gradually, you'll feel the burden lifted. When we let go of control, we open the door to the second key in this pillar, accepting what is and changing what you can. We suffer because we resist reality. We wish the past was different or the future would conform to our will. We refuse to accept the present situation. But you cannot heal or change anything if you refuse to look it squarely in the eye. Acceptance isn't surrender. It's seeing the truth as it is without sugarcoating or distorting it. Applying this in practice when facing a difficulty, a mistake made, or a failed plan, instead of avoiding or getting angry, pause, breathe. Say to yourself, this is what is happening right now. Just that simple recognition, without judgment. Then ask yourself calmly, what can I do about this right now? Is there any part I can change? If the answer is yes, act calmly and clearly. If the answer is no, breathe deeply, let go of the resistance, and focus on facing it with inner peace. Acceptance frees up energy for you to act effectively. To create space for acceptance and letting go, we need to reduce unnecessary burdens. This is the third key. Simplify your life, amplify your spirit. Modern life is too complex. Our homes are full of unused things, our schedules are packed, our email inboxes are overflowing, our phones constantly ringing. All these things silently drain your spirit. We think having more is happiness, but in reality, having more often brings feeling less space, less time, less energy for what truly matters. So how can you apply this? Choose a small area to begin simplifying. You can declutter a drawer in your desk or a small corner in your home. Delete unused apps from your phone. Unsubscribe from promotional emails. Practice saying no to an invitation you don't genuinely want to attend. When you reduce the clutter outside and within, you create valuable space for your soul to breathe and recharge. Simplicity doesn't impoverish life, it enriches your spirit. And the most powerful key to finding instant stillness, always with you, returning to the breath. In every moment of chaos, worry, or fear, the breath is the anchor that holds you to the present moment. When your mind races about the past or future, your breath is always here, right now. It is the bridge connecting your body and mind. Apply this right now. Whenever you feel stressed, overwhelmed, or your mind is racing, stop. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Feel the air entering, your chest expanding. Exhale slowly through your mouth or nose. Feel the tension releasing. Repeat a few times. Simply focus on the sensation of the breath. The breath brings you back to your body, back to the inherent stillness. It is the most effective stress relief tool you don't need to search far for. That is the first pillar, soothing the pressures and noise to create space for what truly matters. When you can do that, you will have enough courage to step into the second pillar, journeying within. Facing your true self, not running away, not hiding.
Pillar 2. Journeying within. Facing your true self.
To begin this journey, the first key is sitting with yourself, not your distractions. As mentioned, we are too quick to fill every empty space with distractions, our phones, social media, work. We fear silence. We fear being alone with our thoughts and feelings. But healing only begins when you dare to stop, cease running, and allow your soul to speak. So how to do it? It's very simple. Commit to spending a short period each day being alone and doing nothing. You can start with just 5 minutes. Find a quiet place. Turn off all notifications and keep your phone out of reach. Just sit still. Observe thoughts come and go. Observe emotions arise. Do not judge, just be present. At first, it might feel very uncomfortable, but be patient. Gradually, you will hear the deep voices, the forgotten emotions that long to be heard. This is how you begin to reconnect with yourself. On this path, there will be times when you feel lonely. That is when you need the key to learning the power of walking alone. We fear being abandoned. We fear not having anyone by our side to feel safe, to fill the void. But solitude is not loneliness. Solitude is a sacred opportunity to meet the most important person, yourself. When there is no influence or pressure from others, you can truly discover who you are, what you genuinely want, your core values. Apply this in daily life by spending time doing things you enjoy alone. You can walk alone in the park, sit alone in a cafe without your phone. Dedicate a weekend evening to doing something you truly love alone. Walking alone teaches you to be self-sufficient from within, not dependent on the presence or approval of others. That is inner strength. When you are brave enough to be alone and still, you will have to face uncomfortable emotions, the pains from the past. The next key is embracing the pain that rebuilds you. We often try to numb pain in every way possible, overeating, overworking, using substances. But pain is not something to be eliminated. It is a teacher. Like a wound that needs to be cleaned to heal, your soul needs to face pain to be healed. So how do you embrace pain? When a painful emotion arises, after a sad event or a criticism, for example, do not run away. Allow yourself to feel it. Breathe with the pain. Place your hand on your chest and acknowledge, I am feeling very hurt right now. Then change the question. Instead of, why is this happening to me? Ask, what lesson is waiting for me here? What is this pain trying to show me? You can try writing in a journal about painful emotions, not to complain, but to discover deeper insights about yourself and life that the pain brings. Pain embraced will temper you. When you have looked pain squarely in the eye, you will recognize old stories about yourself. That is when you need the key to letting go of the old self. We carry a version of ourselves that has been shaped by criticisms, failures, wounds. I'm not good enough. I'm an anxious person. I always mess things up. These are cages created by ourselves, based on the past. But you are not the person you were yesterday. You are constantly changing. To be able to step into a stronger new self, you need to be willing to let go of the old self that no longer serves you. Apply this by identifying the negative stories, the limiting beliefs you still hold about yourself. Try writing them down. Then actively challenge them. For example, if you have a limiting belief that I'm very shy, every day do a small action that goes against that belief. It could be smiling and greeting a stranger or asking a question in a meeting. Each time you act differently, you are telling your mind that the old self no longer defines you. Letting go isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to be bound by it. On this journey, please remember the most important key to healing: choosing compassion, even for yourself. We find it easy to be compassionate towards others when they stumble, but when we make mistakes ourselves, we become the harshest critics. We blame ourselves, torment ourselves, feel guilty. But you, dear friend, you are human. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are learning. The path of growth is never perfect. Apply self-compassion by talking to yourself as you would talk to a dear friend in difficulty. When you make a mistake or feel like you're not good enough, instead of scolding yourself, say, "It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. I've learned a lesson from this." You can try placing your hand on your chest, breathing deeply, and repeating phrases like, "I am having a hard time. I accept this difficulty. I deserve love and gentleness." Self-compassion isn't making excuses. It's creating a safe space for you to stand up and keep going. It is the foundation for true healing. That is the second pillar, the courageous journey inward, facing what is hidden and healing with self-love. Once you are steady within, you are ready for the final pillar, mastering your mind and living a life on purpose, creating your own reality from wakefulness.
Pillar 3. Living mindfully and on purpose, creating your new reality.
To do that, the first key is becoming the observer, not the reactor. Your mind constantly creates thoughts and emotions. Most of the time, we get swept away by them like a leaf carried by the current. A negative thought appears, and you react immediately with anxiety. An uncomfortable emotion arises, and you act on it without thinking. To become the observer is to create a pause. When a strong thought or emotion appears, do not act on it immediately. Take a deep breath. Recognize, this is a thought, or this is anger. Observe it like you observe a cloud passing by. Do not judge it as good or bad. Simply watch it. That small pause gives you back your power. You choose to react consciously instead of being controlled. You can try setting random reminders throughout the day, and each time the reminder goes off, stop and observe the thought or emotion present without doing anything else. The thoughts you observe have the power to shape your life. That is why the next key is so important, breaking the cycle by breaking the thought. Our minds constantly repeat old stories, negative thoughts. I'm not good enough. I will fail. Everything always goes wrong. If we don't realize it, we will believe these thoughts, and our lives will become a reflection of them. But thoughts are not truth. They are habits, and habits can be changed. To break the cycle of negative thoughts, become a detective of your thoughts. When a negative thought appears, do not accept it immediately. Ask it, is this thought true? Is it helpful? Is it leading me where I want to go? Most of the time, the answer will be no. Then actively replace it with a more supportive thought. For example, instead of, "I'm too scared to try this," say, "I can do this one step at a time." Instead of, "I'll never be able to do it," say,
I am learning and improving. You can try writing down 3 to 5 limiting thoughts you encounter most often, and for each thought, write down a more positive and realistic replacement. Practice identifying and replacing them every day. This is like planting a new garden in your mind. To master your mind and live a life on purpose, we need focus. The final key in this pillar, choosing mindfulness over multitasking. We pride ourselves on the ability to do multiple things at once, but that scatters the mind, drains energy, and we miss the beauty of life right before our eyes. Mindfulness is the opposite, doing a single task with your full presence. Apply mindfulness in daily life by choosing a simple activity and performing it with complete focus. When eating, just eat. Feel the flavor, the texture. When walking, just walk. Feel your steps, the air. When talking to someone, just talk. Truly listen. Mindfulness brings you back to the present moment, the only moment you are truly alive. It makes life much richer and deeper. You can try practicing mindful eating for one small meal each day. Turn off all devices, eat slowly, and just focus on the eating experience.
Those are the 3 pillars: calming the chaos, facing yourself, and living mindfully. When you practice these principles, you won't just feel better. You will change how you experience your entire life. You see, true transformation isn't something far away. It's within your reach. It is built day by day, in small choices, choosing to let go instead of control, choosing to face instead of flee, choosing to be mindful instead of automatically reacting. Start today. Don't try to apply all 12 principles at once. Choose 1 or 2 things from these 3 pillars that you feel you need most right now. It might be 5 minutes of sitting still, or just focusing on your breath a few times a day. This path is your journey. There will be easy moments and difficult moments. Be patient and compassionate with yourself. You are not broken. You are becoming. You are not behind anyone. You are on your own path of awakening. The peace, strength, and true self you yearn for has always been within you. Be brave enough to return and discover it. Wishing you a meaningful journey of transformation. Thank you for listening.